breaking news from here, from Donbass. First of all, protests break out in Ukraine. Secondly, Ukraine, or rather the Kiev regime, all but declares war. And not just to anyone. We're not talking here about the Russian Federation or Vladimir Putin. To the United States, and therefore almost personally to Donald Trump, and definitely to his administration. We'll talk about this right away, which is going to cause a lot of controversy. And it could be the first nail if the West wants to use this opportunity indeed to get rid of Zelensky in the coffin of the still, although already highly delegitimized Ukrainian president. But first, two pieces of news that I just can't hold back, because it turns out that point number one, those Mirage 2000 planes that France sent to Ukraine, which really, well, they were nothing but scrap metal. And the thing is, France has simply followed the path of so many other Western countries, and lately even Australia has joined in. They've basically just gotten rid of their junk, if you pardon the redundancy, that they had in their respective military warehouses. But on top of that, they've also tried to use this as a way to harm the Russian Federation. And something that's almost more important, to enrich themselves at the expense of a country that, in the end, is eventually going to cease to exist. Either because it will run out of men or because it will run out of territory. Because yes, indeed, the West has never cared about Ukraine, much less its people. Well, these good planes are already performing well in combat. Practically, I would say they are fighting in favor of the Russian Federation, because they are helping to eliminate Ukrainian forces almost as effectively as the planes of the Russian Federation do. Because, well, unless the pilot was from NATO, in which case it's NATO fighting against itself, because, well, it turns out that when they handed over scrap metal, that scrap metal could almost fall apart in the air. And the plane, the first Mirage 2000, has indeed ended up crashing just a few hours ago. And this happened because it seems that it had some malfunctions. Well, I would sum it up by saying that it started up and we were just grateful. And from there, well, everything was just a matter of luck, until the luck, well, completely ran out. Secondly, another crucial news item. This afternoon, based on what the Russian side has confirmed, these negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are going to take place in Istanbul, the third round of them. So we will most likely analyze this information, on one hand, in tomorrow's report, but above all, as soon as the first details come out. They will appear on my Telegram channel, Liusivaya, or Liusivaya, along with my other social networks, and I will also post them here in the comments. If I already have the post, then I'll share in the comments the post I make on Telegram about it. I wouldn't wait too long for that. Maybe some prisoner exchanges, but well, the details will come when they happen and when the negotiations in question are finalized. In the meantime, why have these protests broken out in Ukraine? What has happened? And above all, why has Ukraine stood up to them? Or, well, it has actually declared almost nothing less than war on the United States. And here, the Zelensky regime. I would say that they haven't acted very prudently. I think what got to them is that the United States has started to put the screws on them. And just a few hours ago, the presidential office, personally, Volodymyr Zelensky, and later the Ukrainian parliament, approved a law that was precisely what brought about this mobilization. Which really doesn't come from the Ukrainian people, but rather from the Western side, from the same Ukrainian chess game, or almost directly from the West. We'll talk about this in a moment. But the law consists of, in some way, cutting back the powers, although in fact I would say this is practically equivalent to the dissolution of both organizations. On the one hand, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, known as NAVO, and on the other hand, NAVO, if you will, that's what we'll call it. Because honestly, the role it played was pretty insignificant, and now Zelensky wants it to be even more insignificant. I'll explain why momentarily. On the other hand is the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. Basically, what happens is that before there were two organizations that worked quite independently, or at least that's what could happen on paper. And they could control almost any area, both political and, of course, almost military, right, of Ukraine. But above all, they focused on the political side in terms of, well, actually stopping the corruption that, well, really does exist in the country. It was impossible to know, but of course, what was really peculiar about these organizations? Well, back in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, shortly after the Maidan happened, they were created, yes, but not by Ukrainian institutions or by the Ukrainian politicians, but they were created directly from the West, particularly from the United States. It was Washington that controlled things up until the law was passed. That's where this pretty serious, pretty forceful declaration of war comes in, right? I think Zelensky made it because he has no other way out. But it was Washington that controlled the institutions in question, which, by the way, were not under the control of either the presidential office or the Ukrainian parliament. And therefore, well, even though in theory they were independent, of course, they recently started wanting to investigate Volodymyr Zelensky's closest circle, which he didn't seem to like very much. And so, just a few weeks later, he actually decided to put an end to it. Because, well, investigating his own family directly like this, who must be extremely honorable people, is not easy. I think that, as we would say in Russia, it doesn't fit through any door, that this can't happen. And it had to be stopped, so indeed it was ended before it could happen. Ukrainian society, well, it started not the whole society, but students and some more liberal groups, meaning those who were deceived at the time, and especially those who are, in fact, practically on the Western payroll. Because isn't it surprising that the Ukrainian population hasn't risen up in any way, not even slightly, against the forced mobilization happening in the country? I mean, I assure you, there are people who are extremely disillusioned with it. They don't rise up because of that. But now they do take to the streets because, I don't know, some anti-corruption office stops working, which is actually the important point. Never really worked as such because Ukrainian politicians did whatever they wanted. But the office in question was more about gathering data to have a file big enough on every politician who mattered even a little in the Ukrainian national arena, so they could bring out this information if necessary. Basically, to have the politicians grabbed by their balls, including, of course, the Ukrainian president himself. I think that as long as he wasn't causing any problems, Zelensky's office didn't really pay much attention to him. But now that he started causing trouble, they've decided that, well, that's not going to happen. And it seems like lately his relationship with Trump was getting a lot bitter. Well, they've decided that maybe it was a good time to do it, or maybe they just did it because there was no other choice. Because, I repeat, the investigations were already closing in on the Ukrainian president's inner circle. And of course, what happens now? After this law was passed, what happens is that the two institutions in question, from now on, they come under the control of the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office, which in turn is under the full control of the presidential office. So, from having been at the service of Washington, they now come to be almost directly under the absolute control of the presidential office. And therefore, they come to be almost personally at the service of Zelensky. We'll see, because this is going to be the most interesting part, which will end up being the American reaction. Because now the West has made a move and for now has sent all these groups out onto the streets, which it uses precisely for similar occasions. For the occasion to be redundant when they need to stir up chaos X in the Y country. In this case, yeah, refers to Ukraine. But be careful, in the presidential office, it's not like they were fools either, because they were there waiting almost. as I know for a fact, inside a bunker, watching to see if the revolution would break out before passing the law. They released the information and observed the reaction. And the moment they realized it wouldn't be such a massive reaction, they said, go ahead, at least my family will be safe. And so we keep breaking it in big time. Watch out. I highly doubt that Trump's office is going to let Zelensky do that. Well, he's already done it, but I don't think he'll get away without any response, even if it's indirect. I'd love to know your opinion about it, because it's just that he's thrown a dart at him, practically a glove to the face. In a way that's not just direct but obvious, and we already know that's one of the things the President of the United States hates the most. We'll see what happens next. But the Kiev regime, I think, must be between a rock and a hard place with these investigations. But above all, from now on, if the West, especially the United States, wants to get rid of the Ukrainian suitcase, they can use this as the first step for that action. Because Western media have already started writing that Ukraine is committing this first blow to democracy, as if there were even a hint of democracy in Ukraine. But of course, in the case of telling Ukraine that there are no more weapons, about which, by the way, you can find information on my Telegram channel, the Patriot systems, for instance, will require about 8 months for delivery. That's only one system, keep in mind. But anyway, whatever happens, the United States can really take advantage of this, especially in the long run, because a few months later, after letting time pass and gradually abandoning Ukraine more and more, it's just a possibility. Mind you, I don't really think they're going to abandon Ukraine right now, but we'll see, because Trump can sometimes be absolutely unpredictable. A few months later, they can always say that such problems came from those situations, meaning, well, they didn't want democracy. All anti-corruption offices were shut down. We said, because the European Union said don't do it, we said they shouldn't do it. But now, look, we have to leave them stranded as if we were going to abandon them. We've never abandoned them. It's just that they themselves haven't left us any other choice.